Welcome back to the other side of change, only on the Black Star Network. My name is Jamira Burley, and as always, I'm here with my brilliant co-host, Brea Baker. And today we're celebrating, well, as much as we can.
Yes, please, always as much as we can. But Black history is not just trauma. It's not just struggle. It's brilliance, innovation, queerness, rebellion, art, softness, audacity, survival. It's all the things. And far too often, entire chapters of that history, specifically Black queer history, get erased.
Yeah, so today we are digging into the hidden figures, the unsung heroes, and the Black queer icons who shape movement, cultures, language, fashion, and politics, and often don't get the credit for their contributions.
Yes, amen, amen to that. And we're asking a simple but powerful question. What happens when we tell the whole story of our community? So I'm excited for today's conversation. But of course, we have to start with the headlines. And we're not celebrating everything today, right?
Unfortunately, my first headline, as many of you have probably heard, Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jesse Jackson, unfortunately passed away today at the age of 84 years old. He is a well-known icon in the movement for civil rights and justice for Black lives, and he has been working tirelessly his entire career. As many of you already know, he is the founder of Operation Push and the Rainbow Coalition. So he has been ingrained in civil rights and civil actions for as long as I know, and as long as many of you has known. So it's truly devastating to hear that we have lost another leader from our community, especially at a time where it feels like so much of the work that individuals like Reverend Jesse Jackson put forth and fought for, put their bodies on the line for, is being erased and are being revisited even now today. So a lot of work still ahead, and hopefully we can continue to look towards those leaders like Jesse Jackson to continue to use as an example for what we need to continue to do.
Yeah. I mean, every time I wake up to someone's death announcement and it's not Donald J. Trump, I'm just like, why, Lord?
Yeah,
Why?
that would be a day of celebration, but we better stop because I hear he out here asking for phone numbers and emails of folks who are criticizing ICE. So yeah, what a time.
Right, exactly. Oh my gosh. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we still got to talk about Don Lemon and other things that are going on with the attacks on journalists. But yeah, no, Jesse Jackson, definitely a baton carrier, someone who came up and following some big assassinations when people were feeling hopeless and were feeling lost, continued to do the work, continued to make sure that multiracial organizing, that intergenerational organizing, that the rhetoric of Black power did not die with them. And that is really important to name. And there's things that I also am critical of with Jesse Jackson too, but I think that here, while we are memorializing him, I can hold space for all of the things that he did really, really well. His presidential run paved the way for President Barack Obama's presidential run, which is why Donald J. Trump's comments are even more disgusting. But, the picture in my head of Jesse Jackson that I'm holding is him hugging Shirley Chisholm, and those two paving the way for all of the Black people who continue to run for higher office in the 21st century. It would not have been possible if he had not first said, hey, we're not just going to be votes that you're going to take for granted or chase after. We are going to be candidates too. We're not just footstools for your vision. We have our own visions. We have our own agendas, and we want to speak for ourselves. And I think that is so, so important for us to reflect on right now.
Absolutely. And to your point, we all, especially the younger generation, may have a lot of mixed emotions about some of the actions of our of former leaders within our movement. But I think his life and legacy is something to not stray away from. It's something to definitely
Yeah.
deepen your understanding of the civil rights movement and all the contributions he and many people like him have made. Because there's lessons to be learned. There's examples to take. There's marching orders to continue to pass down. So definitely praying for his family. I will not read, as you probably all have probably seen, Donald Trump has made a statement on his quote unquote Truth Social, even though he doesn't know what truth is, about the passing of Reverend Jesse Jackson. And of course, he took that moment to throw a jab at former President Barack Obama because he's clearly obsessed. But don't allow our leaders to be used as political tools by those who seek to dismantle their legacy.
Say that part. Say that part. Well, on another headline, speaking to just like some of the coincidental or I think not moments, today
Mhm.
we're filming this on Tuesday, February 17th. Today is the start to Lunar New Year, which is celebrated across East Asia and Southeast Asia. Today is the first day of Mardi Gras. Today is a solar eclipse in Aquarius. And today is the beginning of Ramadan. So there's so much happening today. And I just feel like I don't know. I'm hoping it's ushering something in that we need, right? Like I'm hoping that
It's the year of the
we feel
dragon,
a
right?
shift. Yeah, no, the year of the horse.
The hair of yours. I'm a dragon. That's why I asked. Okay, yeah, of
Yes,
course
you're
I'm
a dragon. Yeah,
all about
yeah.
me. Yes.
You dog, I think. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just like I love to see this convergence of many different cultures celebrating very big moments, either religiously or in any other sense. And I just feel like we could really use a shift of power. And I hope that whatever portal we ended up in, we end up in a new one as a result.
Absolutely, because at this point, even a black hole is looking really sexy, right? Looking very attractive.
Hello. Listen, I'll
But no,
jump right through
seriously,
that thing. Come on.
I appreciate you sharing that the Lunar New Year. I think it's a reminder that there is a lot of beginnings and endings, and we do not have to,
Yeah.
strap ourselves to one versus the other. We can look at so many different opportunities for a new beginning, either for our own personal behaviors or for our behaviors and how we show up in community with each other, especially at a time when so many folks' rights are being violated, including those from the Asian community. So, we got to remember that we are each other's neighbors, and we not only need to celebrate and take part in other people's culture, but also make sure that we're protecting them as we deal with a fascist government. Fun times,
That
right?
part.
So my
Speaking of
next,
fashion,
I know, fascist government. Speaking of a fascist government, as you all know, I am a Philly girl through and through. And a few weeks ago, I think I actually might have mentioned this in a previous episode, but the Trump administration has now been ordered by a judge to restore the slavery exhibit that was at the Philadelphia Presidential
mm,
House. Um, they are trying to erase Black history across the board. They're trying to almost minimize the trauma, the economic advantages, the structural backing of what was behind the institution of slavery that still exists today, right? Many of
yeah.
the institutions that made money off of the lives of enslaved people are still existing today. And we see the Trump administration trying to minimize that by really taking that exhibits across the country, asking museums to rewrite history or to whitewash history about what we actually know to be true. And it's so interesting as someone who took a number of like elected African American studies courses in college, the way we talk about slavery is like a 5 out of a 10 to what we should be talking. Like the true
Yeah.
horror of slavery has not been made mainstream. So the fact that they're trying to
Yeah.
whitewash what little we are talking about, I think is very indicative of any government that is trying to whitewash or erase history has never been on the right side of history. So keep that in mind. But shout out to Philadelphia for not backing down and actually pushing back. And that's what we need more local governments to do, to not take these actions by the administration lying down.
Exactly. Yes, yes, yes. We say this over and over. I feel like it needs to be our podcast tagline, but it's so important to reiterate, do not comply in advance.
Not
And
comply.
I think that that is
I
so
think that's right. I think that's right. We're going to change.
no,
Do not
literally, the other side of change. Don't comply in advance. No, for real, because it's so important for us to not lay down and just say, "Oh my God, they're coming for us." Like, yeah, that is the role of white supremacy. That is the role of capitalism. That is the role of those in positions of power who hoard money and resources at the expense of the rest of us. And our job is to not comply in advance, to resist like hell, and to be in deep community with one another, to ride out the moments where we're not able to kind of stop the onslaught. And so I think that that is really, really critical. If you have not listened to our last episode, black or not the last episode, but 2 episodes ago, we did Black history in the age of fascism. I'm really happy to celebrate this in Black History Month, and to know that there are institutions and people and advocates who are fighting for our ability to preserve and continue to share Black history.
Yep.
Yeah.
Too true.
Well,
Too true.
on a very different little notes. But I'm always dropping in little notes towards women's sports. I think we're in such a golden age of women's sports, from basketball to soccer to track and field to gymnastics and everything in between. There's so much beauty with women athletes right now, and women athletes in the WNBA are doing amazing things, but they're in the middle of these contract negotiations, and it seems like the WNBA has not really been budging around revenue sharing, which is so important for these women to get paid. And so there's been some musings as far as that. So the WNBA is operating as if they're still going to have a season in spite of there not being a new contract negotiated. And the players are like, I think not. One of the most visible players in the league, Breanna Stewart of New York Liberty, has notably just signed on to a Euro League. Their championship overlaps with what would be the beginning of the WNBA season. And so people are like, ooh, is she basically saying, okay, so since y'all are playing with us, let me go get me another job while we strike? Is she like alluding to the fact that the WNBA is going to have a delayed start because the players are not going to play until they get a new contract? Unrivaled, a rival player-led and created league has also been taking their own jabs, which I'm loving. They just finished a really highly celebrated 1-versus-1 tournament where the winner, Chelsea Gray, made $200,000 in 31 minutes, and that's more than she gets paid for the WNBA all season. So they are basically saying, we're going to get to the bag with or without you. And I hope, as someone who supports and has season tickets to this upcoming season, I hope that the WNBA gets it together, because I want to continue to show up for these players. But that means supporting them when they say, we're not playing until we get paid.
No, absolutely. Like the amount of resources and money that is not being funneled to the women's NBA, despite their contributions, despite what they're generating, right? Despite their turnouts, is really disgusting at this point. Like the fact that women are still, specifically women athletes, if not women across the board, are still advocating for, being paid fairly compared to their male counterparts for doing the exact same job is beyond frustrating, especially in this economy where we know that there's a standard of living that a lot of athletes have to adhere to in order to compete, right? In order to be able to show up. And it's just unfair, especially when you look at behind the curtain and you understand that the reason why a lot of it is women's NBA are not able to pay players more is because of the NBA, right? In the contract, media contract that they helped to install, and how their ability to kind of capitalize on the women's market and preventing them from being able to scale the way that they should. So I'm here for it. Shut it down. Stop the season, right? Like, because if you even look at what's her name, I forgot her name. She was stuck in Russia for a drug charge.
BG, Brittany Griner.
Yeah. But why did she even have to go there? Because she could not afford to live, and she had to go and get an additional job working on the off seasons. And like, that's just unfair. It's unfair that we are not at a point where we can pay women athletes, especially because there's not that is such a smaller number of women WNBA players compared to NBA players. And I'm very excited to see them continue to kind of stand up for themselves, and hopefully the fans will understand and lean into them actually holding the space for power and actually pushing back against the institutions that are sucking them dry.
Period.
So, with that being said, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to jump into the topic of the day. We have an amazing interview with one of our faves, and so I'm super excited to finally have him on the show, but we'll tell you more about that after the break. You're watching The Other Side of Change only on the Black Star Network.
I'm Brittany Noble, Midwest-born, HBCU educated with experience in newsrooms across the country. Well, I've teamed up with Roland Martin to bring to you The Breakdown. This isn't just news. It's our stories, our voice, our community. Join me for The Breakdown, Monday through Friday at midday, only on the Black Star Network.
Welcome back to The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network. It is Black History Month, and we are not a monolith. We come in so many sizes and shades and sexualities, and so we want to honor that. And it's wild how even when it is Black History Month or Pride Month, we see pushback for any version of our history that includes queer folks. As a proud queer Black woman, I want us to acknowledge that our Black history is not full if it's sanitized.
Absolutely. And the truth is, you cannot tell the story about Black liberation without Black queer people, period. You can't tell the story about the civil rights movement without talking about Bayard Rustin organizing the March on Washington, or Audre Lorde helping to redefine what feminism is, specifically through the lens of a Black woman, to Marsha P. Johnson sparking resistance with the Stonewall. They were centered to the story of not just Black liberation, but also the liberation of this country. This country would not be where it is today without those efforts, without their words and actions, and in many cases, putting their bodies on the line.
Yes, exactly. Specifically putting their bodies on the line at a time when they had to experience the racism, the homophobia, the transphobia, the sexism, all of these things converging, and still were able to be inventive and creative and empathetic and thoughtful and bold and powerful. And yet so many of us were not learning about them in school. That omission is not accidental. It's very intentional. Number one, they don't want us learning Black history at all, but when they do, they want us learning it through a very patriarchal lens. They want us learning that womanhood looks a certain way. They want us learning that queer people are some figment of our imagination, and none of that is true. And that's why we need to lean into visibility. We need to tell those stories because visibility is power.
No, absolutely. Especially when you think about even just viewing some of the images from the time of those movements, right, that still exist today. The vast majority of them are in Black and white. And the reality is Black folks brought the color, right? We brought the color to that, not only as a representation of the complexities of our lived experience here in this country, but also to the understanding that they are trying to make it seem like these things were so long ago, that that the problems exist anymore. And what we're seeing is that even the solutions that was developed over the last 50, 60 years were not truly ingrained within our culture, to an extent that Donald Trump can come in and in the matter of less than 12 months, dismantle the vast majority of civil rights protections that we've had, which is why we want to recognize that, yes, there is still much work to be done, but we need to celebrate all that has been accomplished. And we're celebrating Black LGBTQ brilliance today, but we're also grounded in that reality, right? The reality that there is still so much work to be done, but we have to honor those who have come before us in order to be able to continue to pick up that mantle and lead their legacy. Black LGBTQ people face serious and organized threats that are structural and that are being led by one of the most powerful governments in the world, to the extent that there's not a lot of pushback from the outside of the US to really hone in on protecting the civil liberties and civil rights of those who are the most vulnerable within our society, which we know are Black, brown, and queer.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and so those parallels could not be more obvious in this moment. When you see book bans, the books that have been banned most frequently typically feature Black, queer, or people who are both Black and queer, right? Yep. And so that is why, I mean, number one, you're never going to tune into The Other Side of Change and not get context. Jamira and we are queens for nuance and for being both anders, right? And so we are both celebration and context, because celebration without context becomes decoration. And in this day and age, we can't afford to be escape artists, right? We have to be grounded in what is current. But in this moment, politically, we're not here for neutrality. We're watching these coordinated attacks that Jamira just mentioned. We're seeing this fascist government, who has historically always began by targeting those considered deviant, dangerous, or outside the norm, which always includes Black and queer people.
And, Black, queer, and trans folks sits at the intersection, like squarely at the intersection, Blackness and queerness, which means that oftentimes they are the first hit, the hardest hit, and also the last hit again, right? It's often starts with us, and it will always end with us in the way in which our society continues to attack those who are the most vulnerable. So, we are going to explore both the celebratory nature of the LGBTQ community's contribution to Black history and to American history, but also reckon with the fact that, wow, there's still so much work to be done, especially now.
Yeah.
And we all play a role on that, even if you're not Black and a member of the LGBTQ community.
Yeah. Especially if you're not Black or queer. But let's take Rounds of the Joy for a second before we jump ahead to what we need the accomplices and the allies to do. The truth is, as we've said, Black LGBTQ people have shaped this country in ways we never really recognized on a mainstream scale. I think the realization for me is that you are a student of history, you have all these revolutionaries who you love, and then you go back and realize that so many of them are queer. We named some of them, but a lot of times people who don't want to give the LGBTQ community credit are secretly huge fans and would not be here without those contributions. Angela Davis, brilliant Black queer woman. There's so many radicals and revolutionaries who hoteps do not want to acknowledge or Black and queer. James Baldwin, whose words have been such a guide and a balm and a conciliator for us, right? Like it's not even just history, it's also present day. There's so many brilliant Black queer creatives who we are learning so much from, and who are like the soundtracks that we're listening to, who are making the movies that we can't stop watching, who are making the TV content that we are binging, like all of that. It's so embedded in what we do and who we are.
I could not agree more. Ballroom culture alone reshaped global fashion, music, language, words like shade, tea, serve, clock it, all born from Black and Latinx queer communities. That is cultural like architecture that really defines the way we all move and engage with each other.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned Bayard Rustin earlier. I believe there was a biopic made about him I was so glad that he was finally brought to the forefront, because in real time he was kind of sidestepped because people were worried that his queerness was going to be a distraction from the civil rights movement. Like, can you imagine organizing the March on Washington and being told, hey, we don't want you to take away from your own creation? Like, how insane. I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. One of our founders, Lucy Diggs Slow, was a queer woman who lived for decades with her partner. So knowing that even a part of, Divine Nine and Greek life, that a queer Black woman in the early 1900s was also creating the first sorority and communities for college educated Black women to come together and find one another. So just like there are just so many examples of us leading the way and just through so much grief too. Like that Bayard Rustin had to organize marches for people who wouldn't see him in his fullness and still did it, right? Who showed up for the Black community, even when the Black community couldn't see us for who we were, who wanted us to go to church and, pretend to be someone we were not, who wanted us to show up in spaces and perform masculinity and femininity in ways that did not feel intuitive to us. I mean, even like a Whitney Houston, that was something that was a big part of her documentary, was feeling like America had to see her as a Black icon in a straight way that was not true to her, and that it was something that she had to hide for so long because she was so busy trying to flatten her identities, trying to be one or the other, that she couldn't be both at the same time, but still being someone for everyone. Like it's such this like double.
Yeah, and I can't imagine the psychological warfare it is, right? To have to fight beside people who don't see you as human or want you to deny part of yourself. And I think that's what's most fascinating about the leaders we do know, because imagine all the ones that we don't, right? Those who are afraid to live out loud, afraid to live in their truth and be who they are and love who they wanted to love. And that's why folks need to stop seeing like the story and history of the LGBT community as separate from the Black liberation movement. It is centered to it. Black queer people were strategists, theorists, artists, healers, and organizers. They laid the groundwork for the reality that we live in today, the ones in which that is protected to some extent, that is now currently being dismantled. But I can't imagine having to exist within a world in which you cannot fully show up as your full self. And also let's remember that when we think about like masculinity and femininity, it's also often through the lens of the white gaze. It is what white people define as masculine and femininity, but queerness and trans communities have always existed throughout the history of Black people, if you look at the continent. And so we are almost going against the very nature of who we are, because we were brought to this land and our masculinity and femininity were redefined. But it's all BS.
Yeah.
Like, all of it is BS.
Exactly. No, it's all BS. But what you just said is like mic drop, is the moment. Is like we have always existed in a certain way when we were on the continent, and then we were forced into being a diaspora community. And in those various different countries where we were brought, we have been forced into these boxes that are so rigid and that are so antithetical to who we are. And so now when we see these attacks on queerness and on transness and on gender fluidity and sexual, just like sexual variation, that is to resist. That is also to resist white supremacy, is also to resist, hey, colonization, is also to resist, you don't get to tell me who I am in my body. I have autonomy over myself. And so we as Black people, whether you are queer or not, whether you are trans or not, should be very vocal in this moment and saying any attacks on one person's autonomy are attack on mine. And so that's why we can't ignore this. In the last few years, there have been more than 500 anti-LGBTQ bills introduced across state legislatures. This is a decentralized movement to control the way that people dress, to control the way that people celebrate and love and show up in public. It's not random. It's extremely coordinated. And so we have to be really, really intentional about resisting it.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, many of those bills specifically target trans youth, redistricting of healthcare, banning them from sports, policing bathroom access. We're talking about state level surveillance of bodies that oftentimes put cisgender women at risk, right? And I also want people to reckon with the fact that targeting young people, some of the most vulnerable communities within our society, it's just disgusting. And it's a prime example that we have people who are more obsessed with members of the LGBT community than the LGBT community is. Like, y'all care so much about what other people are doing in the comfort of their home when they're not harming any child, any animal, any person. They're not harming anyone. They're just living their truth. But yet people are just like obsessed with them. And it's like, I need y'all to get a hobby. I need you to get a hobby. Like, and maybe if you were able to come out of the closet, you might be a little joyous too, right? Like, 'cause so many people are just so obnoxious with their hate.
Oh, so obnoxious. And you know, the obsession turns into this need to control the narrative, to target these people, to criminalize the identity, which, a spoiler, is also the same tactics that have been used against racially marginalized people. So these things go hand in hand, y'all.
Yeah, it's all BS. Which is why when governments start banning books about queer people, removing LGBTQ history from schools, labeling gender affirming care as abuse, that's not a culture war of that's just not a cultural war of that is for the purpose of entertainment. That's an authoritarian infrastructure being built in real time in front of our faces, oftentimes with our tax dollars and with our consent. Because when we don't speak up, we are giving consent for the government to do anything and everything within our name, with our money.
Yeah. So. And let's be real about what the government is doing in our name and with our tax dollars. Black transgender women face homicide rates is exponentially higher than the national average. LGBTQ youth are more than 4 times as likely to attempt suicide compared to their peers. And when you add race to that equation, where are Black LGBTQ youth finding themselves? I mean, when we look at rates of homelessness and poverty, and a host of other things, the vulnerability compounds.
Yeah, and yet at the same time, we see public officials openly attacking pride events, banning drag performances, cutting funding from diversity programs that create this chilling effect. And it's so interesting because they use the excuse that we just want to protect young people. We want to protect the kids. Jeffrey Epstein files just came out. I didn't see any trans, any queer folks in those files. What I did see is a bunch of grown ass white men, cis white men, using their political power, capital, money, their nepotism to abuse and degrade babies. So if you really care about babies, I think the focus should shift to somebody else.
Yeah, but we know that that's a scapegoat. We know that that's a talking point for them. They don't care about babies. They are here to arrive in boots and uniforms, and they're going to use whatever narrative allows them to do so the easiest and with the least money spent, right? So sometimes they're arriving in the form of policy language, in the form of curriculum rollbacks, and saying that we just care about what's happening in your classroom, and we just don't want your children to be taught to feel bad about themselves. Erasure of identity from government websites. I mean, I have a friend who works at a consulting firm, but they get a lot of government contracts, and they were supposed to take their pronouns out of their email signatures so that they could not be targeted and not have these contracts taken back from them. Like, it's just the gymnastics, and it's so infuriating. But again, this is why it's so important that we start certain conversations at home as we continue to resist publicly. It's why I protest out in the world, but I'm also having conversations with my Black elders about the role of the church in moments like this, about the role of them in families, that it is not their place to be also policing at home. Like, can we have any place of reprieve from the racism, homophobia, sexism, and transphobia that we're enduring out in the world? We need to be in community with one another in a real way.
Exactly. Because regardless of whether it directly impacts you, regardless of whether or not you know someone, these are members of our community, and they should be treated with a level of dignity and respect, and they should be given the most basic of human rights. Those rights should not be taken away just because you disagree with their lifestyle. Disagree with their lifestyle in silence and go sit in the corner. No one told you to go live like them. Okay, just
I disagree with their lifestyle. I mean, have you seen these people's lifestyle?
Have you seen any of these pastors? Okay, like
Yes.
a lot of people are living in sin, but have the nerve to throw an evil eye at somebody else. And it's like, you could just mind your business. You could literally,
Right.
the way y'all are being silent as Trump is dismantling civil rights, y'all could be silent as queer folks live their best lives and mind their business. But this is where anti-intellectualism come in, right? Like, we talked about this a few months ago, the rise of anti-intellectualism, connecting it directly to the LGBTQ erasure. When you suppress knowledge about gender diversity, about queerness, contributions in history, about the intersectionality, you isolate people in a really real and scary way.
Yeah. And that isolation is intended to make it easier to target people. I mean, I had to get off of the shade room, but those spaces are just breeding grounds for homophobia and transphobia within our community, to make us hateful, to make us complicit and active participants in someone else's oppression. And so there's so many spaces where I'm entering in where I'm showing up as a pro-Black person, and then having to set a boundary around, hey, being pro-Black does not mean you get to walk all over me as a queer woman who's married to a woman who's raising boys with my wife, who, like, you know what I mean? And so I have to be really vocal in those ways, but we have to be vocal together and stand up for, like, it shouldn't fall on the people most vulnerable in and of themselves. And again, that's where we have to fight isolation with education, with awareness, with community.
Yeah, and I saw a really great conversation that was happening on, I won't say the app because I've since left, if you read my recent Substack. But there was a conversation a few weeks ago that was talking about how, oftentimes when marginalized, vulnerable communities cannot challenge the institution, like, they feel so isolated and so disempowered that they can't challenge the people who are really causing them harm, right? The institutions, the power brokers, the one percenters. What they do is they start attacking themselves. They're starting attacking within the, because that's the only form of retribution or where they can channel their anger. And I think that's really why we have to start teaching and protecting history, because when we do so, we're enabled for our communities to actually learn about the realities and the lived experiences of people that look like them. And it builds on that continuum. It reminds young people, this is not new, right? You are not alone. This is part of a long lineage of activism and movement building that requires us to see people within our community as a representation of us, even if they live a lifestyle that we disagree with and something that we don't want to participate in. That's fine too, but that doesn't mean that we should allow anyone to be thrown under the bus just for the simple fact that we disagree with their lifestyle, especially if their lifestyle is not hard, especially actually only when their lifestyle is not harming anyone else.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. So, I mean, we got to celebrate. We got to be loud and joyful and intentional about not making their actions cause us to shrink ourselves, if that makes sense, right? Like, we've got to continue to insist on being seen, especially as vocal Democrats like Gavin Newsom continue to throw LGBTQ people under the bus and say, you know, right now we need to focus on the economy and stop, you know, using this wedge. No, let's drive the wedge deeper and educate, right? Instead of cowering from the moment and feeling like we have nothing to do. So yeah, we're going to continue to celebrate. We're going to continue to be loud. And I'm so excited for today's guest, who's going to help us understand this moment and who does just that in all of the spaces, who's such an incredible advocate for the Black community, for the LGBTQ community, for people of all races, genders, sexualities, all of the things. So just glad to have him here. We'll be bringing him up soon.
Yeah, and just to remind folks before we take a break, celebration is not denial, right? Celebration is defiance. It is to say that you tried to erase us and you failed. You tried to erase us and you failed. And the fact that Black people have been able to find levels of joy and celebration despite constantly being under attack, right? Not just attack from your neighbor or the people across town, but attack by institutional power that continues to try to strip us of who we are, what we could be, and the dignity that is afforded to everyone else, but apparently not to us. So yeah, let's continue to celebrate as a form of resistance and as a form of fighting back.
Yeah.
So with that being said, we're going to take a quick break. Yeah, we're going to take a quick break. You're watching The Other Side of Change only on the Black Star Network, and we are excited for you to meet our guests and learn more about the life, legacy, and celebratory nature of how we continue to lift up those in the LGBTQ community this Black History Month.
They said the quiet part out loud. Black votes are a threat, so they erased them. After the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, Republican legislatures moved fast. New voter ID laws, polling place shutdowns, purges of Black voters from the rolls. Trump's Justice Department didn't stop it, they joined in. In 2018, his DOJ backed Ohio's voter purge system, a scheme that disproportionately erased Black voters. Their goal, erase Black votes and political power. Yeah, that happened. These are the kinds of stories that we cover every day on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Subscribe on YouTube and download the Black Star Network app. Support fact-based independent journalism that centers African Americans and the issues that matter to our community.
Welcome back to The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network. Today we have the guest of all guests, not a guest, but the guest, Dr. David Johns. If you don't know now, you know. He is the executive director of the National Black Justice Coalition, a former White House advisor, not to this White House, and a lifelong advocate for Black LGBTQ plus communities. Dr. Johns, welcome to The Other Side of Change.
Thanks for prayer. I'm happy to be here. One friendly amendment. We are the National Black Justice Collective, not Coalition.
Oh, collective, period. Thank you for naming that for me. Thank you for naming that for me. I'm just more things, y'all.
I just want to sit in the fact that this is our second in a row, like Black man guest who has a PhD. And I just want to say that Black people are not only loud, proud, but also highly educated and are ready to show up. And so, as always, David Johns, I am so honored to be in your presence. Every time I see a video of yours come across my screen, I stop because I know you're going to say something spicy and on point. So it's an honor.
spice.
It's so spicy. It's so spicy. Also, the kids corrected me. It's these two hands, right?
It is. It is.
Okay. Yeah, I was wrong.
It's not this. It's not this. It's yeah.
So it is such a pleasure to have you here. And, you know, one of the things that I truly, as someone who works in education, you are constantly reminding us that we have to teach the babies. They don't know what they don't know. And it's our job to kind of ground them in the realities of what we know to be true about their history and also the history of this country. So I want to ask you, like, why is it important for us to be talking about the hidden history of LGBTQ community, specifically at the intersection of Black's liberation, but also celebrate it, right? There is still so much work to be done to undo a lot of the things that have happened over the last month, but there's a lot to celebrate in regards to how we got here and also the work that many of the members of the LGBTQ plus community continues to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I'm writing it down so I can both process the question and then think about my answer. So first, let me say formally and officially, it is amazing to be with both of you. I love each of you individually and together. The dynamism.
We love you down bad.
The thing for me. So thank you for that. So the Black Baptist grandson preacher in me thinks in three. So I got three. One is to your point, Jamira, of hidden history. It is impossible to talk about Black history without acknowledging that the history has always been queer.
That part.
Period, full stop. So much of my work as the head Russian at the quarterback of NBJC, which is a civil rights organization, uniquely, often and unapologetically at the intersections of what we traditionally refer to as racial equity or legacy civil rights, Black people issues, and LGBTQ equality are things that are often thought about with regard to same-sex issues, maybe HIV/AIDS, as we think about the way that HIV/AIDS continues to disproportionately affect not just Black, same-gender loving men. You won't hear me say gay. Gay is often a signifier for white. Gay men, I use a term that was created by a Black man to make clear that I understand that that there's no mistakes about me, right? Yeah. That I am unapologetically a son of a guy who makes no mistakes, and that so much of what we have the opportunity to do on this journey toward radically inclusive freedom is to reclaim African ways of being. And so, to the point of it being hidden, I want to just name that that's purposeful. Jamira, I heard you say earlier that it's all BS. Yes, my sort of technical version of that is it's all lies birthed from the worst parts of white mediocrity. Of gender constructs where presumably performing cisgendered heterosexual land-owning men are the center of the universe legally, socially, economically, and otherwise. And before we even get into the queer stuff, often tell people, right, like step away from your feelings about somebody's lifestyle, step away from church hurt, right? Religious trauma is a thing.
Yeah.
Being LGBTQIA plus is no longer a diagnosis in the DSM, however church hurt is. Step away from all of that for a second. Let's just process that two things. One is that everything originated in Africa.
Yep.
And so for Black folks who give our Native and Indigenous siblings space and honor that there are nations now where gender constructs don't exist, where there are not words for male or female, where in fact people who are what we refer to as gender expansive or gender variant or gender non-conforming, those people actually occupy revered sacred space in the community. That didn't just skip Black folks. That like everything else came from African folks. There's an author I love, Brea. I was actually just looking for your book, but there's an author I love, Sambufu Somwe, who writes that in my village in West Africa, the words lesbian and gay didn't exist, but the word gatekeeper did, and gatekeepers hold the space between the village and our ancestors. The second point I want to make around acknowledging that nothing is new, and that a lot of this is us having to vomit up in the way that James Baldwin talks about us vomiting up white mediocrity. I'm not going to use white supremacy because that's how it manifests. That's not how it originates. But connected to that is us appreciating that, like, they don't want us to appreciate that there's strength in community. that there's freedom, the ability to be able to explore yourself and love yourself and find love in its many manifestations and whatever that looks like for you and yours, as long as it's safe and as long as it's consensual. And what I know at my big age is two things. One is there's so many of us who, let me say it another way, because I'm a public gay, right? Like I'm invited in this space to have this conversation as someone who publicly identifies as a member of the LGBTQIA plus community. I do that because there is work to be done, and because I know that there are grown people who engage in queer romantic relationships who never identify as a LGBTQI plus community. They don't have to. They're not surveyed about it. They don't need to volunteer it to exist in public or in private. It is simply something that they do. And one of you were saying something before I joined about, go sit, be quiet. If you ain't got no judgment about what ICE is doing, kidnapping people, don't have no judgment about people's lifestyles. A part of that I want to believe is true, but what I also know is that it is so easy for people who are ignorant in the purest sense of the term, who don't have exposure to or proximity to people who can provide windows and mirrors, to listen to the negative messages that we have been taught over time to allow people in positions of privilege and power to control. So that was a really long way of saying things. One is the history that exists is hidden by design, but if we're going to keep it a buck in the way that young people talk about, we have to appreciate that you can't talk about Black people without acknowledging that Black people have always been queer with a capital Q as it relates to how we have lived and loved and how we've shown up in our politics, POLITIK. That's one. The second thing is that nothing is new, and so much of what we have opportunities to do in this moment is to, one, exist in community, where we're not listening to the lie that all of us are hateful people who hate each other and don't want anybody to prosper or thrive, but to show up and learn and grow and love in community, and to do so in ways that allow us to unlock this knowledge that some of us are more privileged to have access to. And then the third is that so much of this is not only about appreciating how we got here, but it's about understanding and finding power in the lessons that have been left for us to not just get through or get over or to survive this moment, but to thrive as a result of it.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Woo.
One seminar, but actually though, I think it's just, you just said so much that's so important, especially when it comes to, we sometimes inadvertently center whiteness and don't even realize it. And there are just so many people walking around spewing things that they've never even stopped to think about, but that white America told them, that someone told them, and they never even questioned it. And I think that that's really important for people to remember. And that's why there's this tension within communities when sexuality and identity are discussed openly, especially in the name of protecting children, as if the pedophilia and the biggest threats are not coming from straight men who are allowed unfettered access to these children through narratives, through religious spaces, through schools. Like, they get to shape everything that children are doing and experiencing, and that's not questioned. And then this, us queer people and trans people are being scapegoated. How do we move from discomfort to celebration? How do we encourage the full Black community to stop believing the lie that queer people are a threat to them or are a threat to their values? And how do we decolonize in the ways that you mentioned?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. How do we move from discomfort to celebration? I think the direct answer is that we tell the truth. In this moment, I'm hearing Professor Manny Marable, who taught me and so many others at Columbia University, the Institute for Research in African American Studies, say we are obligated to speak full truth to power, especially when it shakes our soul. And a part of that is exactly what you two are doing. So to illustrate the point that you made, Brea, about people imbibing things without critically engaging with the things that they believe so fervently, I often ask people to consider why there is only one way in English, in the English language, to refer to a grown boy, right? A boy at some point becomes a Mr. MR, MISTER, it's the same word. However, in English, there are at least 3 ways to refer to a grown girl. She can be a Miss, MISS, a Miss, MS, or she can be a Mrs., MRS. And unlike Mr., which can be spelled different, there's one word, it means the same thing. There's a material distinction between each of those ways to refer to a grown girl. They either provide access to or deny one access to political, social, economic resources, material and otherwise. And if we just stop there, we might be more thoughtful about how we all engage with each other, and in particular, how those of us who have male-identified privilege as a result of how white mediocrity works. If we stop there, we would be better. However, we should go a little bit further and appreciate that, like, all of this is by design. So when we think about how things worked on the continent of Africa, property was passed down to people based on their relationship to their kinfolk. Again, we exist in community. We draw strength in community. We thrive in community. And so it was the case that an African woman, a woman generally, because we didn't have the need for the prefix before colonization started to work in the way in which it works, continues to work. I didn't say work past it, I said works. But what would happen is that a woman who either her husband died, or husbands, depending on the tribe, died, or her father died, she would access that property. It would go to her. The shift through colonization in so many ways means that women are subject to being property to men. And in order to access any of the privilege associated with now maleness, you got to be in a relationship that's recognized by the state. Just processing that should make anybody crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Just processing it makes you realize how not just intentional it was, how structural it was. Like the levels of policy, practice, and cultural nuances that they had to instill in all of us to make us to believe that this is just normal when it's anything but.
And we know it's not, right? So this is why I say to folks, you know, that white folks invented a term to try and tell us that we were crazy for knowing things sacredly in our gut, right? Dryptomania. They tried to tell us that the knowing that we need to be free, that we were not purposed to be in bondage in the way in which transatlantic and transpacific enslavement made it, was not natural, right? Like they tried to convince us that what we know is not true, which is why it's important for us to reclaim African ways of being, to appreciate that so many of us are libraries, right? In this moment where we're having this conversation in the shadow of Reverend Jesse becoming an ancestor, there are now thousands of libraries that have gone with him. It's important for us to be in conversation with him, to read the books that he's left up, so that we don't lose the connection to the truths that will allow us to get free. I named telling the truth as, I think, one of the critical ways that we get from discomfort to celebration, and the other is that we live out loud and we pursue joy unapologetically. And I want to be clear, I'm not a rainbows and glitter kind of gay. That ain't it, right? Like I lead a civil rights organization. Yep. When words matter. I care about Black people being free. The work that we do is about not only naming the ways in which Black cis het women are disproportionately affected by all of these things and dynamics, or what Black feminists refer to as a matrix of domination, the signs, systems, and symbols that allow white supremacy to be omnipresent and hyper invisible. I also do that because what I know is that Black trans women, Brea, you mentioned the 500 bills. There was 1 year, that was last year, 2025, if not 2024, one single legislative year where 500 anti-LGBTQ bills were introduced in a single legislative cycle. What's often missed when we talk about like this onslaught, this targeting of a small population of people that we know of, is that there are Black trans women who often go missing and murdered, and without access to life-saving and life-affirming care. In policy spaces, the word for that is genocide. So I say all of that to say that I'm not talking about living out loud in the way that is traditionally celebrated in June with pride flag and white boys in Speedos. What I'm talking about is a reclamation of Black feminist critique and thought and the application of intersectionality theory and critical race theory so that we can celebrate in Vogue and free your mind, so that we can move past these rudimentary barriers that end up getting in our way. That there are Black people who are defending a gender construct that in this moment suggests that you are not a man unless you have testicles and a penis that you use to procreate. That you are not a woman unless you produce breasts that allow you to lactate, and that you have functioning reproductive organs that allow you to have a child, right? Like, we don't even talk about the fact that there are people who are assigned a gender at birth that they agree with, so they are cis, and that they don't show up.
They don't even meet the requirements
at all. Like, we don't even talk about that, just unhilarious to name the name. We don't talk about that, let alone how the ignorance, I mean it in the pure sense of the term, often results in our death. The last point I'll make about this, I said it in the introduction, is a lot of our work is around HIV and AIDS. Not simply because it pisses me off that Black folks are still dying disproportionately in spite of the medical, scientific, and social advancements, but because the imagining of HIV as the consequence of choosing to be gay, that narrative, right? The myth of the DL man, fueled by our beloved Oprah and J.L. King and these imaginings. And I say that not to say that there are elements of it that are not real, but I say it to talk about that the consequence of it means that we don't talk about how often Black straight women in relationships with Black straight men are exposed to HIV because we don't have conversations that we otherwise should have. And so it's important for those of us who have the privilege to be a public gay, or for Black straight men to appreciate that you can paint your nails and that has nothing to do with your sexual identity or orientation. It's about expression, right? That when we challenge what people assume to be norms or things that are expected of us, that we allow all of us to get closer to freedom.
That is so, so true. I mean, it's a reminder that we should not have any expectation that our oppressor is going to tell us the trueness of ourselves. Like, it is our responsibility almost for all of us to become historians about the realities of Black folks, of all the spectrums. I tell folks all the time, if they can lie to you about other people, what makes you think that they're not going to lie to you about you?
Friend, here's the thing, they're lying to themselves. They didn't take care of themselves. So how they gonna tell you about, like, this is the part about Audrey's quote, and I want to name it and acknowledge I cut you off in love.
No, it's good.
People often, I think, misuse Audrey's, you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. Sure, but that presumes that the master actually had tools. They didn't. We built that shit. We built it for free. Those are our tools. So I say that because I believe that the lesson from Audrey in that context is we always have what we need in order to get free. I didn't use in Vogue by happenstance. Like, if we literally free our minds, the rest will follow. Cue the track, play the tune, right? Like, we have
cue the track.
They have built. There are so many signs, galactic and otherwise, Beyonce, Renaissance, Parliament Funkadelic. Like, if we just turn off the TV, shout out to the poet laureate Kendrick, and appreciate that the revolution will not be televised, we literally can get closer to freedom.
Yep, because we are in the prison of our own minds that we can get ourselves out of. We need no one else to unlock that key. Like, it's about us doing that work, which goes back to my next question, right? Like, the psychological and political warfare that is inflicted upon young Black queer folks because they're not able to see themselves in the historical movement, at least not in a way that, highlights those leaders. But it also makes me think about a point that you said earlier. If we allow queer folks to be loud and proud and be who they are outside of the traditional gender norms, we all could actually live out our true selves and be who we want to be and allow our creativity to flow. So from that standpoint, what have you seen in regards to like the psychological and political warfare that is inflicted upon queer folks and their inability, and what does that do for their inability to be able to exist in their?
Yeah, I want to name it. I hate that you have to ask a question like this so people can appreciate the reality of all of this. Two things to consider. Data is important. One, the suicide rate for Black youth, age 9 through 16 by most measures, has doubled over the last 2 decades. Beneath that, I should be precise in naming that the suicide rate for Black youth generally has continued to increase, while at the same time, it has decreased for every other group of children based on race or ethnicity. And the saddest part about this is that the data that we have access to, based on government sources, including the CDC, organizations like GLSEN that collect school climate data from students biannually, a lot of that data is pre the most recent pandemic inspired by COVID, not the one that has been inspired by white supremacy or mediocrity. And so we should assume that it's even worse, knowing what we know about how the lives of students, school-age students in particular, has been disrupted by COVID and the consequences of digital inequities, and the lack of infrastructure to ensure that all students have access to a high quality education. That's one point. The second point to that is for students who are school aged and who identify as or who are assumed to be queer, because there's often this thing that happens for school age students where adults and other students, often looking through the prism of what society expects of people or what their parents are saying, assume that a child is going to be LGBTQIA+ at the point in which they engage in intimate or romantic relationships. So that's really important. But for students who identify as or who are assumed to be LGBTQIA+, what we know is that their mental health needs around suicidality, so thinking about suicide, depression, anxiety, increase incrementally. For students who ask for help, they often report not having access to that help. And the result of that is that too many of our babies leave the very spaces that they are required to show up in order to engage in, let alone be successful in society. And what we know for students who, beyond students who identify as bi, queer, lesbian, or gay, but students who are trans, which again only means that the sex a doctor assigned to you at birth is inconsistent with how you yourself understand yourself to be. That's all trans means. Move away from how it's been politicized. For students who are trans, all of those things increase incrementally. The result of that is genocide. When you think about the vast majority of those bills that Brea, one of you named, the 500 bills in the legislative cycle, the vast majority of those bills targeted trans students who are, by most accounts, less than 1% of a population. Ask folks who are all up in arms about trans athletes to name a trans athlete. Right?
They can't.
They can. And some of that is because we don't have the space to appreciate that transness is not new, that it has always existed before we were introduced to the term, before people had to publicly identify so that you would know that it's not simply a myth, that it's not the worst parts of all of what we know Caitlyn Jenner to be, that exists and that is a problem. So mental health, what we know based on data, NBJC worked with partners at other organizations like GLSEN, the LGBTQ task force. What we know is that mental health moves Black people who understand the importance of solidarity and linked faith. The last thing I think is important to say to this point is around visibility. It is important for those of us who have the privilege to take up space in public so that young people and adults know that they are not the first person ever to exist in people talk about as a queer experience. And so in this moment, it is not lost on me, while we are celebrating the life and legacy of Reverend Jesse Jackson, a luminary, a political guru, who was also best friends with and movement leaders with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We would not know Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. if it were not for his relationship with his best friend, Bai Rustin. Yep. Most people say his name wrong, but the trick here is saying bi like bisexual. But Bai Rustin is godparents to Malcolm and Coretta's kids. He was a speechwriter. He is the person who introduced nonviolent civil disobedience and organizing strategies to Dr. King and the movement that we now refer to as a civil rights movement. And so when we allow folks to loot our museums, both formal and otherwise, to burn our books, to lie to us and encourage us to grift, and to not know our history, we contribute to members of our beautifully diverse community thinking that living as beautifully and as wonderfully as they are and have been made to be is not the option that they should be making. And we should not be existing in a society where people are engaging with suicidality because they are not connected to communities of care or because they don't know love.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And speaking of knowing love, I want to leave our listeners on this note of feeling like there is an antidote that they can be part of. There is a solution that they can help usher in. For someone who's listening in, wants to celebrate Black LGBTQ history more thoughtfully, what's a good starting point that you'd offer? And I'm going to go first by saying you should definitely be subscribed to Teach the Babies with Dr. David Johns, which is one of my favorite podcasts objectively. And I'm not just saying that because you're here. I really do believe that you curate such a great community of guests and of conversations and centering queer history in ways that defies the politicization. But yes, what is your offer? And you can feel free to reiterate that too, but of where people can start.
No, that was beautiful. I very much appreciate you for that and for joining the classroom there. This week's guest is Minnesota Councilwoman Robin Wansley, who was ground zero in the ICE operation that is happening there. And it's not lost on me in this moment that so much of what she talked about as a student of history and an activist and a political leader in this moment is the importance of community and love. So shout out to Black women, simply because so much of what we know that's beautiful in the world as a result of y'all. For folks that want to know more directly, I would encourage you to visit NBJC on the Move throughout Black History Month. Shout out to Duran Bernard, Black History Life. We have a campaign called Black History AF, where we highlight Black queer folks that you should know, Black, trans, queer, gender expansive folks who are living now and whose legacies continue to allow us to enjoy Blackness and the beautiful neon, technicolor, Afrofuturistic colors that it exists in. And I would encourage anybody who is looking for a political home to organize in and grow in to visit nbjc.org and to find any of the resources. If I've used a term that is unfamiliar to you, if I've referenced someone who you're interested in learning about, hopefully there's a direct resource under the resource tab at nbjc.org. But if not, hit me up respectfully. I'm from Inglewood. I keep it cute. Respectfully, hit me up and we'll get you what you need.
Yes, keep it cute. It was such a pleasure to have you. We of course are going to have you back because you are always just so amazing. But thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
I love you both. Thank you for the labor, for the love, for getting us all closer to freedom.
Yes.
See you both too. Thank you.
Bye. Okay, my favorite interview thus far. Okay, if you're watching, if you probably learned a lot, I'm gonna let y'all process it. We're gonna give you a quick break. You're watching The Other Side of Change only on the Black Star Network. We'll be right back.
They said the quiet part out loud. Black votes are a threat, so they erased them. After the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, Republican legislatures moved fast. New voter ID laws, polling place shutdowns, purges of black voters from the rolls. Trump's Justice Department didn't stop it, they joined in. In 2018, his DOJ backed Ohio's voter purge system, a scheme that disproportionately erased black voters. Their goal, erase black votes and political power. Yeah, that happened. These are the kinds of stories that we cover every day on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Subscribe on YouTube and download the Black Star Network app. Support fact-based independent journalism that centers African Americans and the issues that matter to our community.
Welcome back to The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network. Hopefully you learned that conversation reminds us that Black history is layered. It is complex, it is expansive, and it is beautifully queer.
If we only tell stories of oppression, we are shrinking our own imagination. But as David Johns told us, we are more than what white America and white supremacy has told us that we are. When we tell stories of our brilliance and of our Black queer genius, we expand what is possible.
And if you want to dive deeper and learn more, because again, as I mentioned, we all should become historians, check out these books. One is called The Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde, chef's kiss. Then you have Time on Two Crosses by Byron Rustin. You also have All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, who I know personally. Great, amazing person. Book is amazing. And the documentary, The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson. Please, all of them are worth reading, consuming, sharing, and adding to your bookshelf or adding to your watch list.
Yes, and a lot of those books, including All Boys Aren't Blue, are on banned lists. So you're also supporting this moment where we need to be resisting anti-intellectualism, and also continue to follow organizations like the National Black Justice Collective, the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, and the Black Trans Advocacy Coalition.
Yep, Black history is not complete without Black LGBTQ plus history and celebration. That's resistance in every form.
Yeah, exactly. You've been watching The Other Side of Change only on the Black Star Network. Until next time, keep pushing and do not comply in advance.
Bye, everyone.
I like that.